The transport shuttle glided through the docking bay doors, and Taejin pressed his face against the window like a child visiting an amusement park for the first time. The infinite traverse stretched out before him, a massive ring of metal and light that spun slowly in the darkness of space. He had seen pictures, of course, but nothing prepared him for the actual size of it. The station was home to 12,000 beings from across the galaxy, and somewhere in that enormous structure, he was supposed to learn how to code like the best programmers in the universe. Taejin grabbed his single bag and followed the other passengers off the shuttle. Most of them were tall, blue-skinned Velokar with their distinctive triple-jointed arms and silver eyes. They moved with the confidence of people who belonged here. Taejin, in his standard Earth jumpsuit, felt like he was wearing pajamas to a formal dinner. A Velokar waited at the arrival gate, holding a datapad that glowed with soft blue light. "Taejin Kim, human from Earth?" the alien asked, his voice producing sounds that the translation device in Taejin's ear converted to Korean. "Yes, that's me," Taejin said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I am Kelmer, your assigned supervisor. Follow me." The Velokar turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Taejin hurried to keep up. They walked through corridors that curved upward in ways that made his Earth-trained brain hurt. The station rotated to create artificial gravity, but the effect felt strange, like walking on the inside of a spinning drum. Other beings passed him in the halls, creatures he had only seen in videos. A crystalline hexath floated by, its body refracting light into rainbow patterns. A group of Nilani walked together, their pale skin almost glowing, probably having a telepathic conversation that no one else could hear. "This is the residential wing for students," Kelmer said, gesturing to a row of doors. "Your quarters are here. You will share common facilities with 3 other students. Classes begin tomorrow at dawn cycle. Do not be late." "Thank you," Taejin said, but Kelmer had already turned to leave. His room was small but functional. A sleeping platform, a desk with a computer terminal, and a window that looked out at the stars. Taejin sat on the bed and took a deep breath. He was actually here. After Earth had made first contact 5 years ago. After humanity had been invited to join the galactic community. After thousands of applications had been submitted. He was one of 3 humans selected for the programming exchange program. His mother had cried when he left Seoul. His father had simply said, "Make us proud." No pressure at all. The next morning, Taejin arrived at the classroom 10 minutes early. The room was already half full. He recognized Hana, another human student from the colony on Europa. She gave him a small wave from across the room where she sat with 2 Hexath students. The third human, Sangwook, sat alone in the back, already studying something on his tablet. Kelmer entered precisely at the start of the dawn cycle. "Welcome to Advanced Computational Theory," he said. "For the next 6 months, you will learn the programming methodologies that have maintained Velokar technological superiority for 3,000 years. Some of you will succeed. Most of you will not." His silver eyes swept across the room and seemed to linger on the 3 humans. The first lesson was about basic syntax for the Galactic STANDARD programming language. Taejin watched as Kelmer wrote code on the holographic display. It was verbose, incredibly verbose. A simple program to add 2 numbers required 12 lines of code, each one with elaborate error checking and verification protocols. "Why so many safety checks?" asked one of the Hexath students. "Because computational stability is paramount," Kelmer explained. "Our quantum neural processors operate across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. A single undefined behavior can cause cascade failures across entire systems. Every operation must be perfectly specified, every edge case handled, every possibility accounted for." Taejin raised his hand. But what if the safety checks themselves introduce complexity that creates more errors? The room went silent. Several students turned to stare at him. Kelmer's expression remained neutral, but Tajian could sense disapproval radiating from the supervisor. That is why we have formal verification, Kelmer said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. The methodology has been refined over millennia. It works. Perhaps humans are not accustomed to such rigor. Tajian felt his face grow warm, but he nodded and said nothing more. The days turned into weeks. The coursework was challenging, but not impossible. Tajian found that he could keep up with the other students in terms of understanding the concepts. The problem was the implementation. Everything took so long to write. A sorting algorithm that would have been 5 lines in Python required 300 lines in the Galactic standard. Every function needed elaborate setup and teardown procedures. Every variable needed explicit type declarations, memory allocation specifications, and temporal consistency markers. During a break between classes, Hannah found him in the station's observation lounge. "You getting used to it?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "The code or the station?" "Both," Tajian shrugged. "The station is amazing. The code feels like swimming in honey. Everything is so slow and heavy." Hannah laughed. "I know what you mean. My Hexeth study partners think I'm reckless because I want to skip some of the verification steps. They don't understand that on Earth, we learned to code on systems that were chaotic from the start. We had to be flexible. Do you think we're wrong?" Tajian asked. "Maybe their way is better. They've been doing this for thousands of years." "Better is subjective," Hannah said. "Different, definitely. But I don't think wrong. We just come from a different tradition." Over the following weeks, Tajian began to notice patterns in how the galactic species approached programming. The Velikar valued absolute control and predictability. The Hexeth loved elegant mathematical proofs. The Nulani preferred intuitive, almost artistic structures that reflected their telepathic way of thinking. But they all shared one thing in common. They believed that complexity was inherent to solving complex problems. On Earth, Tajian had learned a different philosophy. His first programming teacher, an old man who had learned to code on ancient personal computers, had told him, "The best code is the code you don't have to write. Every line is a potential bug. Every function is a maintenance burden. Think hard before you add complexity." That philosophy seemed alien here. When Tajian suggested simpler approaches in class discussions, his suggestions were dismissed as naive or dangerous. Kelmer often used him as an example of what not to do. "The human proposes removing the redundancy checks," Kelmer would say. "Can anyone explain why this would lead to system failure?" The other students would then spend 10 minutes describing all the ways Tajian's approach could go wrong. After class one day, Sangwa caught up with him in the hallway. "Don't let them get to you," he said. "They're not trying to be mean. They just don't understand our way yet." "Maybe our way is wrong for their systems," Tajian said. "Maybe," Sangwa admitted. "Or maybe their way is wrong for all systems, and they just don't know it yet." 3 months into the program, Kelmer made an announcement that changed everything. "It is time for your capstone project," he said, and the classroom atmosphere immediately grew tense. "You will attempt to solve the recursive harmony problem." Tajian had heard about this problem in whispers around the station. It was legendary, a challenge that appeared in every advanced programming course, but that almost no one ever solved. "The task is this," Kelmer continued, displaying the requirements on the holographic screen. "You must write a program that simultaneously processes 7 different dimensional matrices, reconciles temporal inconsistencies between them, and outputs unified coherent data. Each matrix operates on different logical principles. The processing must happen in true parallel with no waiting states. The solution must be completely stable with no race conditions, no deadlocks, and no undefined behaviors. The room filled with nervous murmurs. In 3,000 years, only 12 individuals have solved this problem, Kelmer said. The fastest solution took 4 months to complete. The shortest solution was 8,000 lines of code. You have 6 months. Begin. As the other students immediately began forming study groups and requesting access to historical solutions, Tae-jin sat quietly and read through the problem specifications. A small smile crossed his face. He had noticed something, a tiny detail that everyone else seemed to have missed. It was going to be an interesting 6 months. The student center buzzed with activity the day after Kelmer announced the recursive harmony problem. Groups of students crowded around holographic displays, arguing about approaches and methodologies. The Hexeth students had already begun constructing elaborate mathematical frameworks. The Nulani formed a telepathic study circle, their minds working together in ways that other species couldn't replicate. Even the normally solitary Velikar students had formed partnerships. Tae-jin sat alone in the corner of the center, slowly reading through the problem specifications for the 3rd time. The requirements looked deceptively simple on the surface. 7 data streams needed to be processed. Output needed to be coherent and unified. But the deeper he read, the more he understood why this problem had stumped thousands of brilliant programmers for 3,000 years. Each of the 7 dimensional matrices operated on completely different logical foundations. The first matrix used standard Boolean logic. The second used quantum superposition states. The third operated on probability clouds rather than discrete values. The fourth existed partially outside normal time, with data points that could reference their own future states. The 5th through 7th were even stranger, operating on mathematical principles that Earth science hadn't even discovered yet. The challenge wasn't just processing these different types of data. That would be difficult but manageable. The real problem was that they all had to process simultaneously in true parallel. No priority queues, no waiting states, no sequential dependencies. And they all had to produce one unified output that made sense. Traditional approaches treated this as a coordination problem. The historical solutions that Tae-jin could access in the library all followed the same basic pattern. Build elaborate synchronization mechanisms. Create buffer zones between different logical systems. Establish translation layers. Implement countless safety checks. The result was thousands of lines of code, carefully managing every possible interaction between the 7 matrices. Hannah dropped into the seat across from him. Still reading? She asked. 4th time through, Tae-jin admitted. I teamed up with 2 Hexeth programmers, she said. They're brilliant at the mathematical side. We're planning to use a quantum state management system with probabilistic synchronization nodes. What's your approach? I don't have one yet, Tae-jin said. Still thinking? Hannah looked concerned. Tae-jin, we only have 6 months, right? Most teams are already drafting their first architectures. Sangwook has been coding for 3 days straight. I know. I just want to make sure I understand the problem first. Okay, Hannah said slowly. But don't wait too long. This isn't like Earth where you can just hack something together. This needs to be perfect. After she left, Tae-jin continued reading. He pulled up the historical solutions and studied them line by line. They were impressive works of engineering. There was no question about that. The programmers who had solved this problem were clearly brilliant. But something bothered him about all the solutions. They were all so similar in their fundamental approach. Different implementations, yes, but the same basic philosophy. Control the chaos through elaborate management systems. A week passed. Then, too, the other students made steady progress. Hannah's team had finished their architectural design and started coding. Sangwook had already written 2,000 lines. A Velikar student named Keleth had formed a group of 5, and they were approaching the problem like a military campaign. With detailed project plans and daily progress reviews, Taejin spent his time doing things that seemed completely unrelated to programming. He watched old Earth movies in his quarters. He took long walks through the observation decks, staring out at the stars. He practiced calligraphy, something his grandmother had taught him as a child, carefully painting Korean characters with brush and ink. He attended his regular classes, but skipped all the study sessions for the capstone project. This behavior did not go unnoticed. In the 3rd week, Kelmer summoned him to his office. "Den Kim," the supervisor said, his silver eyes fixed on the human. "You have made no visible progress on the capstone project. Other students report that you are not participating in study groups. Your terminal access logs show minimal coding activity. Can you explain this?" Taejin chose his words carefully. "I'm still thinking about the problem, sir." "Thinking," Kelmer repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought about that excuse. "The recursive harmony problem is not solved through thinking. It is solved through rigorous application of computational methodology. You must begin coding immediately if you wish to have any chance of success." "I understand, sir. I just want to make sure I'm approaching it correctly." Kelmer leaned back in his chair. His 3-jointed arms folded in a gesture that Taejin had learned meant disapproval. "I will be direct with you, Taejin Kim. When Earth applied to join this program, there was significant debate among the faculty. Many believed that humans were not ready for advanced computational studies. Your species has only been using quantum computing for 7 years. The other students have trained since childhood. I advocated for accepting human students because I believed everyone deserves an opportunity. But if you fail, if you do not even make a serious attempt, it will reflect poorly on all of Earth. Do you understand?" The weight of it settled on Taejin's shoulders. He wasn't just representing himself or even his family. He was representing his entire species. "Yes, sir. I understand. Then I expect to see significant progress by the end of this week." Dismissed. Taejin walked back to his quarters feeling the pressure. Maybe he was being arrogant. Maybe his approach was wrong. These people had been perfecting their craft for thousands of years. Who was he to think he could do better? That evening, he called his mother using the quantum communication link. Despite the vast distance between the station and Earth, they could talk in real time thanks to entangled particle communication. "How are you, my son?" she asked, her face appearing in holographic form above his desk. "I'm okay, Amma," he said. "Just working on a big project." She studied his face with a mother's practiced eye. "You're worried about something." He told her about the capstone project, about the pressure, about feeling like maybe he wasn't good enough to be here. She listened without interrupting, the way she always did. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted to build that computer game? The space exploration one?" "Yes, you spent 3 months planning it. Your father thought you were wasting time. He wanted you to start coding immediately. But you kept saying you needed to think about it first. Then, one weekend, you sat down and built the entire game in 2 days. It was beautiful." "I remember," Taejin said. "But Amma, this is different. This is the best programmers in the galaxy. You can't just what? Be yourself? Use your own mind?" She smiled gently. "My son, they invited you because you're human, not despite it. Maybe they need a human way of thinking." After the call ended, Taejin sat in the darkness of his room for a long time. His mother was right. He had been so focused on trying to think like a Velikar programmer that he had forgotten to think like himself. He pulled up the problem specifications one more time, but now he looked at them differently. Instead of trying to understand how to manage the complexity, he tried to understand where the complexity came from in the first place. The 7-dimensional matrices were fundamentally incompatible. That was true. They operated on different logical principles. Traditional solutions tried to bridge these differences through elaborate translation and synchronization mechanisms. But what if that was the wrong approach entirely? Taejin opened a new file on his terminal and stared at the blank screen. Not to write code yet, but to explore an idea. What if instead of trying to control how the 7 matrices interacted, he let them interact naturally? What if the chaos itself was the solution rather than the problem? It was a wild idea, probably stupid, definitely not something that would work according to everything he had been taught here. But it felt right in a way that made his programmer instincts tingle. He began researching the quantum neural processors that the galactic species used. Unlike Earth's quantum computers, which were still relatively primitive, these processors operated across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. They had native functions built into their hardware, operations that were as fundamental as addition or subtraction on a regular computer. Most of these functions were well documented and widely used. But as Taejin dug deeper into the technical documentation, he found references to deprecated functions, operations that had been standard centuries ago but were no longer taught or recommended. One in particular caught his attention: Lambad, a native function called harmonic cascade initialization. The documentation noted that this function had been deprecated 400 years ago because it produced unpredictable emergent behaviors. It worked by allowing different computational states to self-organize based on their own internal consistency rather than external control structures. The galactic programmers had moved away from it because they couldn't predict exactly how it would behave in every situation. But unpredictable didn't mean unreliable. And emergent behaviors weren't necessarily bad. The next morning, Taejin arrived at the computer lab before dawn cycle. The room was empty except for one Nulani student who was leaving, looking exhausted after an all-night coding session. Taejin took a station in the corner and began his real work. First, he needed to understand the harmonic cascade function at a fundamental level. The official documentation was sparse, dismissing it as obsolete technology. But buried in the station's archives, he found research papers from 400 years ago, back when the function was still in active use. The original Velikar researchers had been fascinated by its properties before deciding it was too unpredictable. For production systems, the function worked by creating what the old papers called a resonance field across quantum states. Instead of explicitly controlling how different computational threads interacted, it allowed them to find their own equilibrium based on mathematical harmony. The researchers had abandoned it because they couldn't formally prove its behavior in all cases. But the experimental results had been remarkable. In controlled tests, it had solved coordination problems with surprising efficiency. Taejin spent 3 days studying these old papers. His terminal was filled with notes, diagrams, and failed test programs as he experimented with the function's parameters. The function itself was simple to invoke, but understanding how to set it up properly required thinking about the Taejin's problem in a completely different way. The key insight came on the 4th day. Instead of treating the 7-dimensional matrices as separate entities that needed to be coordinated, what if he treated them as different aspects of a single unified system? The harmonic cascade function could potentially allow them to self-organize into coherence. Without explicit management, it was like the difference between conducting an orchestra and letting jazz musicians improvise together. The traditional approach was the conductor. Every instrument carefully controlled, every note precisely timed. His approach was the jazz session. Give skilled musicians A basic structure, and let them find harmony through interaction. Sang-wook found him in the lab one afternoon, surrounded by holographic displays showing test results. "Hey, how's it going?" the other human asked. "I think I found something," Taejin said. "It's probably crazy, but I want to try it." He explained his idea. Sang-wook listened, his expression growing more skeptical as Taejin talked. "That's using the harmonic cascade function, right?" Sang-wook said. "I remember reading that it was deprecated because it's unstable." "Not unstable, unpredictable. There's a difference." Taejin, "I get that you want to find a creative solution, but this is our capstone project. If we fail, we're representing all of Earth. Maybe we should stick with proven methods." "The proven methods take thousands of lines of code and months to write," Taejin said. "I think there's a better way." Sang-wook shook his head. "I hope you're right, but I'm sticking with the traditional approach. It's slower, but at least I know it works." He paused at the door. "Be careful, okay? This matters." After Sang-wook left, Taejin sat in the quiet lab and wondered if his friend was right. Maybe he was being reckless. Maybe his Earth-trained instincts didn't apply in this galactic context. But something in his gut told him he was on the right track. He spent the next week running simulations. He created simplified versions of the 7 matrices and tested his approach on smaller problems. The results were encouraging but not perfect. Sometimes the system found harmony quickly. Other times, it took longer to stabilize. Once, it failed completely, producing garbage output. The failure was instructive, though. Taejin studied the conditions that caused it and realized the problem. He had been using the harmonic cascade function with standard parameters. But this problem needed something different. The function accepted a parameter structure, a way of telling it what kind of harmony to look for. All the old documentation used simple, straightforward parameter structures. But what if he created a novel structure specifically designed for this problem? Taejin pulled out his calligraphy set and began sketching on physical paper, something that seemed to amuse the alien students who occasionally passed by. He drew diagrams of how the 7 matrices related to each other, looking for underlying patterns. He wrote equations in brushstrokes, mixing Korean characters with mathematical symbols. The pattern emerged slowly, like a picture coming into focus. The 7 matrices weren't random. They represented different dimensional perspectives on the same underlying reality. If he could encode that relationship into the parameter structure for the harmonic cascade function, the system should be able to organize itself naturally. 2 more weeks passed. Taejin's classmates made steady progress on their elaborate solutions. Hana's team had written over 4,000 lines and were debugging their synchronization protocols. The Velikar student Keleth announced that his team's solution had reached 6,000 lines and was entering final testing. Even Sang-wook had passed the 3,000-line mark. Kelmer stopped Taejin in the hallway one day. "I have not seen any code submissions from you," the supervisor said. "The deadline is in 3 weeks. Have you made any progress?" "Yes, sir. I'm working on an approach using emergent harmony principles." Kelmer's silver eyes narrowed. Emergent harmony is not a recognized computational methodology. You are wasting time on theoretical fantasies instead of producing actual code. This is unacceptable. "Sir, I believe my approach will work. I just need more time to finalize the implementation." "Time is what you no longer have." Silmer's voice carried disappointment. "I gave Earth a chance with this program. You are proving my critics correct. Perhaps humans are simply not ready for advanced computational challenges." The words stung, but Taejin kept his voice steady. "I will submit a solution, sir. I promise." That night, Taejin sat in his quarters and faced the truth. He had a theory and some promising test results, but he didn't have a complete solution. The parameter structure he needed was incredibly complex. Getting it exactly right would require the kind of precise calculation that should take weeks, unless he was willing to trust the very principle he was trying to use. Emergence thought it was a strange thought. He was trying to create a program that would let complex systems self-organize. But he was approaching the creation of that program through traditional, carefully controlled methods. What if he applied the same principle to the development process itself? Tae-jin pulled up his test code and made a decision. Instead of trying to calculate the perfect parameter structure through analysis, he would create a simple metaprogram that would explore the parameter space and identify structures that showed harmonic properties. Let the solution find itself. He worked through the night, coding a small program that tested different parameter structures and measured their harmonic resonance with the 7 matrices. It ran through thousands of possibilities in minutes, learning which directions were promising and which were dead ends thought by morning. The metaprogram had identified 3 parameter structures that showed exceptional promise. Tae-jin tested each one carefully. The first worked well but had occasional stability issues. The second was stable but slower than optimal. The third was perfect. Now he faced the final step, taking all his research, all his experimentation, all his unconventional thinking, and distilling it into actual code that would solve the recursive harmony problem. He opened a new file. The cursor blinked on the empty screen. Traditional solutions were thousands of lines, long because they tried to explicitly manage every interaction between the 7 matrices. They built elaborate scaffolding to hold everything together. But if his theory was correct, all that scaffolding was unnecessary. The harmonic cascade function, with the right parameter structure, could handle everything. Tae-jin began typing. The code was surprisingly short. Set up the input streams. Initialize the harmonic cascade with his carefully designed parameter structure. Route the output. That was it. The core logic was a single line. He stared at the code for a long moment. It looked too simple, almost naive. Surely solving one of the most difficult problems in galactic computational history couldn't be this straightforward. But simple didn't mean easy. The single line of code represented weeks of research, countless experiments, and a fundamentally different way of thinking about the problem. It was simple the way a diamond was simple, a basic structure that only existed because of intense pressure and precise conditions. Tae-jin ran his solution against the test suite. The first test passed, then the second, then all of them. He sat back in his chair, hardly believing it. His hands were shaking. He ran the tests again. Same results. Everything passed. The next morning, exactly 4 weeks after beginning his actual coding work, Tae-jin submitted his solution to the grading system. The system flagged it immediately with an error message. Submission appears incomplete. File contains insufficient code. Please verify and resubmit. Tae-jin requested a meeting with Kelmer. It was time to show the galactic community what a human could do. The teaching staff gathered in the testing chamber, expecting to witness the failure they had all predicted. Tae-jin stood before them, knowing that the next few minutes would either validate everything he believed about programming or prove that he had been foolishly arrogant. "My solution is complete," he said simply. Kelmer stood frozen, staring at the test results displayed across multiple holographic screens. Every metric showed perfect performance. 0 errors. Processing speed 40% faster than the historical best. Complete stability across all scenarios. And the solution was a single line of code. "This cannot be correct," said Kelleth, the Velikar student who had spent 6 weeks writing 6,000 lines for his own solution. "There must be an error in the testing system." "Run the validation again," Kelmer ordered. His voice tight. The technician executed the full test suite a second time. The results were identical. Perfect scores across every category. A Hexath professor named Vornix floated closer to the main display, his crystalline body refracting the light from the screens into rainbow patterns. I don't understand how this is possible. The recursive harmony problem requires explicit coordination between 7 incompatible logical systems. This solution appears to have no coordination logic at all. Taejin cleared his throat nervously. All eyes in the room turned to him. It doesn't need coordination logic, sir. It uses the harmonic cascade function to allow the 7 matrices to self-organize. The harmonic cascade function was deprecated 4 centuries ago, Kelmer said sharply. It produces unpredictable behavior. Unpredictable isn't the same as unreliable, Taejin replied, echoing what he had told Sangwook weeks earlier. The function creates a resonance field that allows different computational states to find their own equilibrium. Instead of controlling how the matrices interact, I let them interact naturally according to their own mathematical properties. A Nulani professor named Silwan, who had been silent until now, spoke in her characteristic soft voice. The human describes an emergent system. The solution emerges from the interactions themselves, rather than being explicitly programmed. Emergent systems are unstable, Kelleth protested. That's basic computational theory. Actually, Taejin said carefully, emergent systems can be very stable if the initial conditions are right. The key is setting up the parameters correctly. I designed a parameter structure that encodes the underlying mathematical relationships between the 7 matrices. The harmonic cascade function uses that structure to guide the self-organization process. Vornix studied the code, his multifaceted eyes processing information in ways that humans couldn't fully understand. The parameter structure is indeed remarkable. I see patterns here that relate to dimensional mathematics that we consider highly advanced. How did you derive this structure? Taejin hesitated. How could he explain that he had used calligraphy and intuition and a metaprogram that explored possibilities through trial and error? I approached it from a different angle, sir. Instead of trying to calculate the perfect structure analytically, I created a program that searched for structures with strong harmonic properties. You used machine learning to optimize the parameters? Vornix sounded surprised. Something like that, yes, sir. Kelmer's expression had gone from shocked to deeply troubled. Even if the solution works, using deprecated functions violates standard safety protocols. The harmonic cascade function was removed from recommended practice for good reasons. With respect, sir, Taejin said, it was removed because it couldn't be formally proven to work in all cases. But the experimental results from the original research were excellent. I think your ancestors stopped using it not because it was unreliable, but because they were uncomfortable with not being able to predict exactly how it would behave. The room went very quiet. Taejin realized he might have gone too far. He was essentially criticizing the fundamental philosophy that had guided galactic computational theory for centuries, but Silwan made a soft humming sound that indicated agreement. The human makes an interesting point. We have perhaps become too attached to predictability as a value in itself, rather than as a means to achieve reliability. This is heretical thinking, another Velikar professor said. If we cannot formally prove a solution's behavior, we cannot trust it. But you can test it, Taejin said. And testing shows that it works perfectly. In science, doesn't experimental evidence matter? Kelmer held up one of his 3-jointed hands for silence. This debate is premature. We need to conduct more extensive testing before drawing any conclusions. He turned to the technician. I want this solution tested against every edge case in our database. Run the extended validation suite. The complete one, not the student version. The extended validation suite took 3 hours to complete. During that time, word spread through the station about what was happening. Students began gathering outside the testing chamber. Hannah arrived with her Hexith teammates. Sangwook came running from across the station. Faculty members from other departments stopped by to see what the commotion was about. Taejin sat in a corner of the chamber, trying to stay out of the way while the testing continued. Hannah sat down next to him. "Is it true?" she whispered. "One line?" He nodded. "How?" "I'll explain later. Right now, I'm just hoping it keeps working." Sangwook joined them, looking at Taejin with an expression that mixed admiration and disbelief. "I heard you use the harmonic cascade function. That's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that?" "Because we were trained to think it was obsolete," Taejin said. "Sometimes being new to something means you don't know what's supposed to be impossible." The 3 hours felt like 3 years. But finally, the technician announced the results. Extended validation complete. All tests passed. No errors. No stability issues. Performance exceeds benchmarks in every category. The Hexith Professor Varnix spoke into the stunned silence. "In my 200 years of teaching, I have never seen anything like this. It shouldn't work. By every principle we teach, it shouldn't work. But it does." Kelmer looked like he had aged a decade in the past 3 hours. "How long did it take you to write this solution?" he asked Taejin. "The actual code took about an hour, sir. But I spent 4 weeks researching and testing before I wrote it." 4 weeks, Kelmer repeated. The fastest previous solution to this problem took 4 months and required 8,000 lines of code. "To be fair, sir, most of my 4 weeks was spent figuring out the parameter structure. Once I had that, the code itself was straightforward." A thought seemed to occur to Kelmer. Could this approach be applied to other problems? Taejin considered the question. Maybe. Any problem where you're trying to coordinate complex, incompatible systems might benefit from emergent approaches instead of explicit control. But you'd need to find the right parameters for each specific case. Could you teach this methodology? Vornix asked. "I'm not sure it's a methodology exactly," Taejin said. "It's more like a different way of thinking about problems. Instead of asking how to control complexity, you ask whether the complexity needs to be controlled at all. Sometimes the best solution is to set up the right conditions and let the system organize itself." Silwan made her humming sound again. The human describes the difference between gardens and machines. We have been building machines when perhaps we should have been planting gardens. That's a dangerous metaphor, the other Velikar professor warned. Gardens grow wild. Machines are reliable. But gardens are also alive, Hannah said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Sorry, I just mean, on Earth we've learned that living systems can be more resilient than mechanical ones. They adapt. They heal themselves. Maybe that applies to code too." Kelmer walked slowly to where Taejin sat. The human stood up, unsure what was about to happen. "I owe you an apology," Kelmer said, his voice formal. "I underestimated you. More importantly, I underestimated what humans might contribute to galactic knowledge. I assumed that because your species was young, you had little to teach us. I was wrong." Taejin didn't know what to say. "Thank you, sir. However," Kelmer continued, "this raises difficult questions. If your approach is valid, it suggests that our computational methodology may have significant blind spots. This will not be welcome news to many in the galactic community. With respect, sir, I'm not trying to say your way is wrong. Just different. Maybe there's room for multiple approaches." Vornix floated closer. The human is wise beyond his years. This is not about right and wrong. It is about expanding our understanding. For too long, we have had a monoculture of thought. Diversity of perspective may be as valuable in computational theory as it is in biology. The testing chamber doors opened and more students flooded in, all wanting to see the famous one-line solution. Khaleth pushed through the crowd, his face showing a mix of emotions. He looked at Tajin's code on the display for a long moment. "I don't understand it," he admitted finally. "But I respect it. You saw something that none of us saw." The Velikar student held out his hand in the human gesture of respect he had learned. Tajin shook it, feeling the strange three-jointed grip dot as the crowd grew larger. Kelmer called for order. "This session is concluded. Tajin Kim has successfully completed the capstone project with the highest marks ever recorded. News of this solution will be distributed to other institutes for review and discussion. Class dismissed." As everyone filed out, talking excitedly, Tajin stood for a moment, looking at his single line of code still displayed on the holographic screen. It looked so simple, so obvious, but it had taken weeks of thinking. The news spread through the galactic network like wildfire. Within 2 days, every major technological institute across 47 star systems had heard about the human who solved the recursive harmony problem with one line of code. The reactions were mixed and intense. Some called it genius. Others called it a dangerous fluke. A few institutions immediately banned their students from using deprecated functions, fearing that Tajin's success would encourage reckless experimentation. But many more began investigating the harmonic cascade function and emergent computational approaches. Curious about what else might have been abandoned too quickly, Tajin woke up one morning to find that he had received 47 interview requests, 12 job offers from galactic tech companies, and one marriage proposal from a Nolani programmer who was convinced they were quantum-entangled soulmates. Hana found the marriage proposal hilarious and insisted on reading it out loud in the student cafeteria, much to Tajin's embarrassment. "You're famous," Sangwook said over breakfast. "Every programming student in the galaxy knows your name now." "I just solved one problem," Tajin protested. "It's not that big a deal." "Not that big a deal?" Hana laughed. "Tajin, you basically proved that the galactic community has been overcomplicating things for centuries. That's enormous." But the attention made Tajin uncomfortable. He hadn't solved the problem to become famous. He had done it because it was there, because he saw a different way, because it was interesting. The spotlight felt wrong somehow. Kelmer called him to his office 3 days after the testing. The supervisor looked tired, like he hadn't slept well. "Tajin, I need to ask you something. Was your approach something you learned on Earth, or did you develop it here?" "A bit of both, sir. On Earth, we have a philosophy in programming called finding the elegant solution. The idea is that the best code is simple code. But the specific technique of using the harmonic cascade function, that was something I discovered in your archives." Kelmer nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said during the testing, about us being uncomfortable with unpredictability. You were correct. For thousands of years, Velikar culture has valued absolute control and perfect predictability. It's not just our programming philosophy. It's who we are as a species. There's nothing wrong with that, sir." "Perhaps not. But it does create blind spots, as you demonstrated." Kelmer leaned back in his chair. "The faculty council has made a decision. We're creating a new research group to explore alternative computational approaches, with a focus on emergent systems and elegant solutions. We'd like you to lead it." Tajin stared at him. "Sir, I'm just a student. I'm only halfway through the program. You're the student who saw what thousands of experienced programmers missed. That's exactly the perspective we need." Kelmer paused. "I won't lie to you. This won't be easy. Many in the galactic community are resistant to change. You'll face criticism and skepticism. but I believe this work is important." After a long moment, Taejin nodded. "I'll do it, sir. But I want Hana and Sangwook on the team too. And I want to include students from other species. If we're talking about new perspectives, we need diversity." Agreed. Over the following weeks, the research group took shape. Hana brought her expertise in quantum systems. Sangwook contributed his deep understanding of traditional methodologies, which helped bridge the gap between old and new approaches. They recruited a Hexis student named Felthus, who was interested in mathematical elegance, and a young Velikar programmer named Dara, who was frustrated with the rigid orthodoxy of her species' methods. Their first project was to document the harmonic cascade approach and create teaching materials that other programmers could understand. But as they worked, they discovered something more interesting. Taejin's solution wasn't just a clever trick for one specific problem. It represented a fundamentally different computational philosophy. The Galactic Standard approach treated programs as machines to be built with absolute precision. Every component explicitly defined, every interaction carefully controlled. It worked, but it required enormous effort and produced solutions that were difficult to modify or adapt. The emergent approach treated programs more like ecosystems to be cultivated. Set up the right initial conditions, define the basic rules, then let the system find its own solutions. It required less code, but more thinking up front. The solutions were often simpler, but could adapt to changing conditions in ways that rigid programs couldn't. Neither approach was universally better. Each had its strengths and appropriate use cases. But the galactic community had been using only one approach for so long that they'd forgotten there were alternatives. Word of the research group's work spread. A Nulani programmer named Yuna, working at a colony in the Titan system, used emergent principles to solve a 300-year-old cryptography problem. She published her solution with a note crediting Taejin's work as inspiration. Other breakthroughs followed. A programmer named Jiho from Seoul, working on starship navigation, introduced controlled randomness into route finding algorithms and discovered they could navigate around unexpected obstacles better than traditional deterministic approaches. Not everyone was happy about these developments. A group of traditional Velikar programmers published a paper arguing that emergent approaches were dangerous and unprofessional. They called for restrictions on the use of deprecated functions and warned that the human influence was corrupting computational standards. The debate became heated, spreading beyond academic circles into popular culture. Some species embraced the new approaches enthusiastically. Others resisted fiercely. The crystalline Hexith, who loved mathematical elegance, were generally supportive. The Velikar community was split, with younger programmers excited about new possibilities while older ones worried about losing tried-and-true methods. One evening, 6 months after his initial breakthrough, Taejin sat in the observation lounge with Kelmer. They watched the stars slowly wheel past as the station rotated. "Do you regret what you started?" Kelmer asked. Taejin considered the question. The past months had been exhausting. The criticism, the debates, the pressure of being seen as a symbol rather than just a programmer. But when he thought about Yuna's cryptography solution, about Jiho's navigation algorithms, about all the other programmers who were now thinking differently and solving problems in new ways, he felt something deeper than satisfaction. "No," he said finally. "I think the galactic community needed this. Not because our way is better than yours, but because having only one way of thinking is limiting. Diversity makes systems stronger." Spoken like a true programmer, Kelmer said with something that might have been a smile. "You know, when I first met you at the docking bay, I thought you were just another primitive human who would struggle and eventually give up. I'm glad I was wrong. You gave me a chance, sir. That's all I needed." No. What you needed, you brought with you. Fresh eyes. Willingness to question assumptions. The courage to trust your own thinking, even when everyone else disagreed. Kelmer turned to face him directly. Those are rare qualities, even among the most advanced species. The graduation ceremony took place 2 weeks later. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and visitors from across the galaxy. Many had come specifically to see the human who changed programming history. Taejin stood with Hana and Sangwook as Kelmer read the names of graduating students. When he called Taejin's name, the applause was thunderous. Not just polite ceremony applause, but genuine appreciation. Taejin Kim, Kelmer announced, has not only completed the advanced programming program with the highest marks ever recorded, but has also contributed to expanding our understanding of computational theory. He has been invited to continue his work here as a research fellow, and his methodologies are now being taught at 57 institutes across the galaxy. Taejin walked across the stage to receive his certification. As he shook Kelmer's hand, the supervisor leaned close and whispered, "Your mother would be proud." She was. Taejin had called her the night before, and she had cried happy tears. His father had simply said, "You stayed true to yourself. That's what matters." After the ceremony, as Taejin stood with his friends accepting congratulations from classmates and professors, Felthas, the Hexeth student, approached. "I have a question," the crystalline being said. "Your solution, the one-line code. Did you know it would work when you wrote it?" Taejin thought back to that moment, staring at the blank screen, about to type the simplest and most radical solution to an impossible problem. "Honestly, I believed it would work, but I didn't know. I had to trust my instincts and the research I'd done. Sometimes that's all you can do." That must have been frightening. It was, but also exciting. That's what makes programming interesting, isn't it? You're always solving problems no one has solved before, at least not exactly that way. If it was easy and predictable, it wouldn't be worth doing. Felthas' body refracted the light into thoughtful patterns. I'm beginning to understand why humans approach problems so differently. Your species hasn't had thousands of years to develop rigid traditions. You're still comfortable with uncertainty. Maybe, Taejin agreed. But I think anyone can learn to think differently if